the easiest thing to do would be to start from our specular channel, because this is only the spec hit, and use this to build our little artifact. So I'm going to take my spec channel and I'm going to grade it to increase the contrast, because I'm only interested in that artifact in the brightest areas of the spec. So I'm going to crank up I'm going to adjust the gamma here to kill the midtones, but I want to accentuate the brightest spots. And I got to be careful about this, because you'll notice when we were looking at the background, it was only the brightest areas that created any of this effect. I'm going to desaturate this using a saturation node so that I'm only getting something that's like a matte. And then I'm going to blur this. We have to blur it to be about the same amount as what we were seeing in that artifact, and it has to have a similar character. So we'll have to either use a blur type that gives us that type of fall off on the edges, or we'll have to adjust our resulting effect. Let's look at the plate again to see what we have. It's a very small radius, and it's kind of a pinkish reddish color. So we got to stay in the same zone in terms of that artifact. We don't want to overdo it and create an artifact that looks unlike that. It needs to look similar to that. So I'm going to adjust the gamma of this with a grade node. I could use a gamma node also. Adjusting my blur again. Let's get rid of that. Adjusting the black point here to clip off the darker areas I don't want and only keep these brightest areas. Okay, so now I've only got the brightest hits. And let's add this back on. Now I'm going to do it after my merge, actually, because this goes on top of everything. So I'm going to just plus this. It's not going to be the right color at first, but it will adjust that. And now we will actually put another grade here to get this pinkish tint that these seem to have, and tint our little glow effect that we created, that pinkish color, using a gain. Don't want to go too far, but we'll have to look at this in context here to see if we've got the right feeling. There we go. We started to replicate some of that artifact that we're getting in our specular hits here. And I got to be careful to not go too far with it. I think I may have gone too far in some places, like on top of Medusa's head. But in areas like this, it seems to be mostly successful, mostly working. So if we wanted to put it in one area but not another, first of all, let's reduce the overall effect. I think I might have too much of it, so I'm not going to add on so much. I'm going to back off with some of it, not put so much on. And that was enough to help the stuff on Medusa's head not seem so ridiculous, just by not putting quite so much on. So sometimes it's better to back off a little than push it too hard. And then overall sharpness, we mentioned we wanted to see if we're in the right zone. It still feels to me like the CG is a little too sharp. So before I merge everything, I'm going to blur it, but not after I've put the grain on, but before I put the grain on. And I'm just going to use a blur, not a defocus, because in this case, a little bit of blur is not going to look artificial compared to a defocus, because they're only talking about a tiny amount of blur to make these two similar plane of focus match between the background and Gary. So just a smidge, it's like half a pixel's worth of blur. Helps make it seem a little more real. And then, that's looking pretty good. That's looking pretty good. I think I would stop right about now and I would ask for somebody else's opinion. So if you can get it this far, I'll be very, very happy. So this is how you use additive compositing and bring a plate like this together. How you do a shadow and how you add those little touches of noise and blur and everything else to get it to all come together. So this is your assignment, is to do Gary. And we're going to look at one more example, which is much more simple in terms of additive compositing, but it'll give you a little bit more insight into the workflows as well. Oh, and I realized we never put Medusa's glowing eyes on. So let's add Medusa's glowing eyes. There's more than one way we could do it. We could either add it here before we do the merge over, because as you'll remember, if something is not pre-multiplied in an over, it essentially adds on. So any additive effect that we need to get down to here, we could do before here, or we could do it after this merge. I'm going to do it up here. So I'm going to simply just take her glowy eyes, I'm going to add them to our totally prepared setup. And as you'll see, if I toggle this, it adds her glowy eyes on top of everything. And because they survive past the over, because an over, let's look at it, the pre-multiplied thing. There's the pre-multiplied everything, and here is the glowy eyes. And this is definitely one of those special cases you have to look out for when you're doing glowy things like this in your comp, is how are you going to handle the logic, right? Because if I was to unpre-multiply this here and then re-pre-multiply it, let's look at that. And then we'll re-pre-multiply it, pre-multiply. You'll see that her glow was trimmed off. So you have to be very careful about how you handle things when you are trying to have a glow type effect come along for a ride on something that's going to be alpha composited. Where are you gonna put it into play? In this case, I put it here. I don't like how glowy those eyes are. Let's back off a little bit. Heck, let's make them more intense. Let's go even bigger with them. I want them to look brighter, but not so glowy. So they look like they could hold up to this, to the lightness, the brightness in this environment, and still have justify that glow. So I'm using the gamma to adjust the fall off of the glow, and the multiply to adjust how bright they are inside. So I don't know if that's looks real, but it looks different. Looks cool. Okay, so that's the whole thing. How to get the glowy eyes in there as well.